Welcome to the Teaching Liberty podcast. I'm Stephanie Edmonds, creator of Teaching Liberty and your host. And today I'm having a conversation with somebody who's really become one of my favorite people. I guess this is like 2 weeks in a row I'm doing a podcast with like two of my favorite people. This is awesome. And I'm so happy to introduce you to her, Rachel Langan, who's become one of my spiritual, religious, faith partners. Even though she is like non-denominational Christian and I'm Jewish. But I'll let you introduce yourself, Rachel. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Rachel Langan. I live in Westchester, Pennsylvania. I'm mom to 5 kids. My youngest is 13. My oldest will be 23 in a few days. My background is in public education, which I think is how I actually ended up stumbling upon Stephanie, because she was in public ed. It's kind of during that 2020 thing when I'm super frustrated that my kids'
You're one of those
open
parents. Oh my goodness.
Yes, that was me. And I remember really clearly, I think I remember clearly. I think it was like the week off between Christmas and New Year's of 2020. And I was on Instagram and I came across your account and I think it was pretty new. And I was like, oh, like, I like what she's saying. And she's a teacher, because there weren't many teachers standing up against what was happening. So I was like, oh, I really like what she has to say. So I started following you. And then we started, I don't know, connecting in private messages. And even though we don't have a lot in common, like our lives, if you're to make a Venn diagram, like we don't have a lot that overlaps, but really this whole freedom issue is what kind of pulled us into the same orbit.
Which I love that. And that's why I like to say, instead of like-minded people, I like to say liberty-minded people.
Yes.
I don't like to be around like-minded people. I don't like to be around people that think exactly the same as I do. I like to be around people that are open to the way that other people think and other perspectives. And I think that's something that we've always shared. And to me, that's all the overlap that we need. I was a little taken aback when you're like, we don't have much in common. I was like, no.
Well, I mean, if you look at a Venn diagram, like I'm like 2 decades older than you.
That's true. I always forget that. You know, a lot of my good friends, like this last 2 years, have all been like right around your age. Like my good teacher friend at school, she had just turned like 50 or 51. The woman who I'm working with at on this nonprofit for the film stuff, she's around your age too. So I don't know. I'm liking you, you Gen Xers, right?
Yeah. Gen X is the best one, the best generation.
I know, like you guys were kind of like, everybody kind of talks a lot of crap about you guys, but now you're really showing out. So yeah, that's how we connected. And I mean, yeah, we did connect over the school thing, but I don't remember, how did we even get onto the religion topic? Like, but we started talking about religious stuff pretty early on.
Yeah, I don't know.
You probably just sent me some, like,
remember.
I feel like you probably just sent me your Christian interpretation of something.
Maybe.
And I kind of like gave my take and we started going back and forth like that.
Right.
And, you know, I've always been a pretty faithful person. I grew up in Reformed Judaism. I haven't always like practiced like you might picture a Jewish person practicing, but I've always believed a lot in God. I named my son, like I knew I always wanted to have a name from the Bible. I named him Caleb. And so I really credit you with being one of the people who's kind of brought that faith to a much more intentional way, where I am going back to some of more of these traditional practices, which I think is helping me navigate this postmodern apocalyptic scenario we're in. But let's back up. Like, bring me through your religious journey. I mean, I've heard some of it here and there. I don't know if I've heard it all laid out in one sitting. So give me, or all of us here listening, or who will be listening, a little overview of your religious journey.
Well, I think there's just some interesting pieces that go into it. Like my mom's mom was, sorry, my AirPod just fell. She was a nun in the Catholic Church. She was the second of like 10 or 12 kids. And during the Great Depression, her family was like, we don't have money to feed you. They sent her off to a convent. And so she hated it. She like suffered like hunger and abuse in the convent. So she like came when she got out, met my grandfather, got married. Obviously not a cool thing to not be a nun anymore, but she remained part of the Catholic Church. Then she had my mom. My mom was raised in the Catholic Church, but she kind of did not, she was like, I don't know, you're not practicing what you preach kind of thing. So she was kind of like a-religious, met my dad. He had, I don't know what background he was. They kind of like didn't really go to church. And then at some point, my mom like found Jesus and became like super religious. And then she went on a path towards Judaism and Messianic Judaism. But then for me, like I was not so much a part of that. Like I had always grown up going to church, and my brother-in-law has said something once that I think makes so much sense, that in Christian religions, different denominations tend to focus on different parts of the Trinity to the exclusion of others. And I grew up in a church that was very Holy Spirit based, to the exclusion of like God and Jesus. Like we didn't really focus so much on those, just like the Holy Spirit. So everything had this like undercurrent of what's really going on, because it's this spiritual fight. So I think I've just always been very attuned to that. And then when I became an adult, I, preferred to go to a church that was a little bit more introspective rather than like out loud. And that's when I really started to be like, okay, I really need to like dive in more to like the other parts of the Trinity, like God and Jesus, because I get this Holy Spirit thing, but like I feel like I'm like missing this connection with my creator. So I kind of dived into that. But then the 2020 stuff happened, and I just felt like put on the brakes. Like this feels like there's like major spiritual undertones happening here. Like this feels like some kind of spiritual struggle that is like now on the forefront. Like it just, I felt it in my being. Like I almost felt like the hair stand up on my neck when like March 2020 happened. And so that, not that I ever left the Holy Spirit aspect, but I really started paying a lot more attention to the spiritual side of things and looking at just historically, like even when we, Stephanie and I did a Bible study with Daniel and Book of Revelation, like going back to things that happened back in the Bible, like strongholds that have happened that repeat, that like that pattern repeats over time, and you can still feel that like kind of struggle for good and evil. So I really started focusing more on that in 2020 and trying to figure out like as much as one can, like what's really going on here, because nobody was talking about it. Like no churches were talking about it. I was shocked. And churches like just are like, okay, we're closed. I was like, what is going on? And so I was like, something is not right here. So I just really started diving in more for my own personal journey at that point, being like, all right, I just really have to dig into my faith. And I've heard different people say since that time, like pastors, like, I know it's really tempting to walk away from your faith now, but like, you need to hold firm. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I think it's the opposite. Like, I feel like 2020 brought so many people back to faith. Like, I don't know anybody who's seen what's happened now and it's like, yeah, I'm done with God. The people are like people literally said to me, like, I'm actually starting to think there is a God now, because like I'm seeing things happen and like there could only be one explanation for this. So yeah,
I mean,
like,
I definitely met a lot of people. And I mean, again, it's hard to say how much of that is due to like your own bias moving through the world and the people who you end up connecting with. But I mean, I couldn't really help this. I had somebody moving upstairs. It's a couple, they're around my age and they have a son around my age. And they talked about how in the last 2 years, they started going back to church again and getting really into it. And we'll talk about the Bible, and they go to Bible study once a week and church on Sundays. And I just met a lot of people that have really come back to God. I mean, I've met plenty of people too that have always kind of been like a-religious or kind of rejected religiosity after having a bad experience growing up with it, and they're still plenty firm in there. Like they don't really understand how you could believe in God, but at the same time, when I do say things like God bless, or like I mentioned how I started reading the kids' Bible with my son, they're like, oh, that's kind of a good idea. Like the stories are good in the Bible. Like I think it might be good for my child to have a relationship with God. So there is that as well, which is interesting.
Well, I should also interject that prior to 2020, so like 2019, fall of 2019, my sister and I were having like these daily debates about like the church and where the church was going. And we were kind of like calling America post-church. Like the church has lost its way. Like I won't even get into it, but we were kind of joking that like we were like on the front end of that curve. Like we were like post-church before all the churches shut down.
That's
But
so
just
funny, yeah.
like it had lost its relevance. And then sure enough, like closed their doors, and we're like, well, I guess we were right about that. So we're trying at the same time and trying to navigate feeling like I don't have a church home right now because I have walked away from the churches that I was attending because I don't like how they responded to COVID and like the shaming of congregants who weren't buying the narrative. And I'm not going to be a part of that. So while I consider myself a Christian, I do not go to church on Sundays. And that's a pretty new thing for me. Like I've gone to church my whole life. So I do struggle with that for sure. Because I do think community is important, but I'm like, I can't find a community that was willing to stand beside me when I didn't believe all the crap that was happening. So I'm still looking.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely think that's the dilemma. It's always existed, but I think I mean, we're alive now and we're in this postmodern era. So I would argue that these themes and tendencies are particularly acute. And I'm sure that they have been at other points in history at this high of attention. I mean, the Protestant Reformation, that was huge. So I would argue that we're arguably at a similar like Protestant Reformation point in time, right? We have this new technology that's coming in that's making communication more easy. It's making, I mean, not exactly transparency because, you know, the church isn't transparent. Big temples aren't transparent. All these big places aren't transparent. But because you can just see more as a person than you could ever see before, you can connect dots in a way that you couldn't. So I think in the aspect of the technology, driving people to look at things and undercover, is the church really, like how your mom said, acting in line of the things that it professes to do, right? Or like the letters that John sent to the 7 churches in Revelations. So are they really living up to the things that they're professing to do, or are they just going through the motions?
Right.
So I think that that's in this day and age, religiosity more times than not, if you're like really keeping your faith, you probably aren't going to be with a church, right? You're probably going to be forming your own community. I know a lot of people that have started ministries. You got your
ordained.
I was like, what is it called? I was like, it's not a license, is it?
I guess
it's like a different word. So yeah, I think that that's the key, is we have to be forming our new churches. And something that's interesting for me is I grew up in a Reform Judaism, which is like very modern, like liberal Judaism. You know, I went to Hebrew school, learned Hebrew, had my bat mitzvah, but you know, we don't keep Shomer Sabbath, like, you know, meaning you can still use your phone and do things on Saturday. You don't say all the prayers with the intensity. Men and women sit together when you pray. Like, so I always looked at these more conservative forms of Judaism. I kind of looked down upon them a little bit. Like, oh, men and women, they sit separately. Like, oh, it's so restrictive. Like, I can't do anything on Saturday. Like, I can't play soccer, you know, like I can't like do all these things that I enjoy doing and I feel like give meaning to my life. I don't know. That seems a little bit extreme. But when it came to the pandemic, who were the people who took me in, right? The Chabad, the Hasidim. So whereas like the Reform and even the Conservative, there's like kind of three levels. There's like Reform,
Right.
there's Conservative, who are like pretty modern Jews, but they'll still do like separate men and women. And they're a little bit more like strict with the traditions. But they don't typically wear like the payas always,
Right.
or some of them do, some of them don't. It's not as outwardly like Jewish. You see them walk to temple on Saturday. Some of them do keep Shomer Sabbath, but a lot of these like places that aren't super strict, like the Hasidim and the Chabad, vaccine cards, right? Masks required. And so when I'm looking to find a church, right, to go pray with, to try to really bring some more of these practices that I think are important for maintaining your faith, right? Because when you lose that faith in those moments of, right, your mind leaving you, you need those practices to bring you back. So I liked the idea of going to Shabbat and doing these disciplines, these structures. The only place that I could find was a Chabad, so that's where I've been.
Right. And I think that there's freedom in faith. And I think a lot of people look at that as the reverse, like that, following a religious practice is so restrictive. But like, you realize when you give things over to God or follow his plan for you, that it actually brings freedom because you're not bound by caring about what other people think of you, or you're not bound by doing what some church tells you that you have to do. And you're like, oh, wait, the Bible actually doesn't even talk about that. Like, why have I been doing that all these years? And so I think that for both you and I, like our houses of worship wanting to put restrictions on us other than to just come and gather, like the masks, the vaccines, like that's the opposite of freedom. And that's also the opposite of faith. Like Jesus, like he sat with the lepers. He wasn't like, sorry, dude, you need a face mask. I was like, this is so not right. Like, I'm like, I cannot participate in this. And it was not a faith crisis for me whatsoever, because my faith has always been very strong, but it was just more a disillusionment in like the actual church and the failure of leadership in the church.
Right, the
And
institutions.
yes. And I will say that before COVID, my circle was a lot smaller. Like a lot of my friends were Christians. And since COVID, my circle is much, much larger now and contains so many more people who before I would have never been friends with, because I felt like how we were talking the other day, you and I, like purity tests, not really necessarily purity tests, but like a litmus test. Like I felt like we had to align on certain things in order to be friends. And now I'm like, basically, like you're willing to accept me because I'm not vaccinated. We're friends. Like that's kind of where it starts. And I have so many more diverse people in my field now, which is actually what we're supposed to be as Christians, is to like go out to other people, not stay in your own little space. So
Well,
that's
wasn't
also
that
like
like
freedom.
the 12 apostles, right? Jesus, didn't they all kind of have like slightly different takes on like the word? I think I heard one of those Christian YouTuber philosophers talking about it, Jonathan Pajot. I feel like that was what he was talking about, because he's a certain denomination. Oh, he's Orthodox, and then one of the other guys that he speaks to is Methodist, or they have slightly different denominations that they belong to. And he was talking about how he thinks it's like or perhaps he wasn't saying he thinks it is, perhaps it's a reuniting of like the 12 different apostles.
Ooh,
they're slightly different,
interesting.
takes around the dinner table. So yeah, I was telling you, I definitely want to look more into just that history of like Jesus and the apostles and their relationships, and some of these like pretty badass things that Jesus, everybody always talks about, like how Jesus walks on water and he healed the sick, and those are like awesome and badass in their own right, but I think him questioning like the definition of what is work on the Shabbos, like I don't know, that feels like really in line with the way that I think about things.
Right. Well, like he hung out with like Mary Magdalene. She was a prostitute, and he basically like went to her and was like, go and sin no more. Like you are freed from this. And like that was not cool for like a single man to be, with a woman of ill repute. And he hung out with tax collectors who were like the lowest of the low. And he didn't care. And I think that that is like pretty counter culture that time.
Yeah.
And so I always wonder, like, what would my take have been on him if I had lived at that time? Would I have been like a Pharisee, like, ooh, gosh,
Right.
you're gonna get leprosy now that you were hanging with them? But I don't know. Maybe I would have been like, wow, he's amazing. I don't know. I don't know what I would have thought.
We read the story of Haman. Was it Haman? No,
Yeah.
Naaman, and he has leprosy, right? It's in the Old Testament. Naaman has leprosy, and there's like he was in Syria, one of those countries, and they like invaded Israel, and they like took over the Jews and like took them back as slaves, and this little slave girl told Naaman to cure his leprosy, like, I know where you can go and do. And it was just kind of showing that, even you should always be nice to people and kind of maintain your faith in God, and God will reward you. So I just think that's an interesting story too. I'd like to go back and read maybe that full story and see how it relates to the Jesus leprosy event. Because I do feel like the New Testament really does that a lot, right? They're like, because historically, they have to legitimize themselves. And the most popular religion at this time where they are is Judaism. And so if they're drawing on a lot of these common themes, even now, I almost think about it like pop culture, right? If I'm going to make a piece of relevant content today, I need to make sure like I'm having these common pop cultural references and understandings. And I feel like that's like kind of what Christianity did with Judaism. They're like, hey, we need to speak to our audience. So we're going to echo a lot of these Jewish allegories, stories, religious teachings, and put a little new spin on them, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. But I do think that there was a connection from that idea of like Jesus questioning things and wanting something different, and us questioning things and wanting something different. And like, what's the line between questioning things and wanting something different in a way that allows you to get closer with God versus the way that you actually get further away from God? And I think that this is the conundrum of like being a human. It's like, you're here, like this is the truth, right? And the truth can go both ways. The truth can go to God, or it can go away from God. And that's why it's so tricky. And that's why it's so hard to understand. So how, when I'm questioning the order, when I'm questioning the way we do things, right? I want things to be better. I want to make progress, right?
Right.
So, and then that goes back to Adam and Eve and the story in
Genesis.
Yes. And, they're hanging out, but it's like they want more, and, I'm sure they want more to be closer to God. I think they even, I'll have to go back and read the actual words, but, they want to be closer to God. They want to understand more. They want to understand in the way that God understands, right? So it's this desire to understand more, but God didn't intend for them to know that.
Right.
And so then they fall out of, grace. And I see that in the same way that I see all these technologies, all these, nice comfort things that we have. It's like, which ones actually bring us closer to God, and which ones bring us away? What did God intend for us to have and not?
And sometimes it's a distraction rather than, and then that's something that helps us, It is a fine line for sure. And I think it's different for each person too. Like I've listened to multiple sermons over the past 2 years where, they'll say like, as Christians, we're not called to fight. And I'm just sitting there like online watching, thinking like, I can't not fight against this. Like I can't see what's happening at my kid's school and sit back and say, okay, like I have to fight. And I think that God gives each one of us gifts, and like we're expected to use those gifts. And I could not handle it if I didn't fight back. And if that's considered wrong in some people's eyes, well, that's too bad. Like, I feel like I'm doing what God called me to do. And when I look at where I am in my life now, I can look back on many experiences over decades of my life that I feel like prepared me for this moment in time. And that I feel like is confirmation that I'm headed in the right direction. That God's like, yes, all those circumstances that you didn't know what was happening or why, or felt really hard, like now you can see. And so, like, you know what? Tell me it's not right to fight. I'm still going to fight. I mean, I'm not out there with boxing gloves. I'm not
Right. I
literally
wonder
hurting
what their
people.
basis though, like what is the biblical basis for them saying like we're not meant to fight? You know, like I guess you can say like Jesus was a pacifist in some ways, but like
Right.
also like he started a lot of crap, you know, like he didn't take crap from people. So I don't understand like what basis they would have to even say like you're just supposed to sit back and have faith in the world and what happens happens. Like
Right. I know. I agree. It doesn't make sense to me. And, like good versus evil and God always wins. So we're just supposed to sit back and like eat the popcorn and watch God
right,
win. But I'm
right,
like, I have to live here in the meantime. So
right. Because
yeah,
like even Daniel, like you know, a lot of the incidents that happens are pretty non-violent, right? I mean, there's
right.
plenty
Yeah.
of violence. There's plenty of violence. Don't get me wrong. Like, but you know, the whole story of Daniel, the way that they fight back is not literally by putting on boxing gloves and
Right.
fighting. It's by
Non-compliance.
right. It's by non-compliance. It's
Hmm.
by speaking and saying, "Hey, this is my. I'm gonna have my faith no matter what you do." And I feel
Right.
like that's kind of the equivalent of like going to your school board, right, and saying, "Hey, you guys have these rules, and we're not going to comply with them for these reasons. They don't make
Right.
sense." And um, so that's interesting that they would just want you to be compliant. I don't. But it goes again back to what's that proper balance between
Hmm. Yep.
what it means to fight, right? What it means to want more progress, what it means to want to do better, and what it means to I don't know, go in the other direction. And it's just like with all these technologies, especially. I'm reading I'm reading American Muckraker by James O.
Oh.
It's
Okay.
really good. I'm only like a couple chapters in, so maybe it
Okay.
gets really bad. Who knows? But it's really good so far. It's worth it for just
Is
the
it fiction or is that nonfiction?
no, it's nonfiction. It's
Okay.
like he
Gonna
writes
write that down.
he gives like kind of a history of how the modern press evolved
Oh.
from print to radio into the television and then into the
Mm,
internet era. And he talks about
interesting.
alongside that how this like undercover reporting evolved as well. Um,
Interesting.
and you know they make statements about how that you know the technocracy they can't control all this technology, right? And I've made this argument myself, like that technology is democratizing. I'm like, but is it really? Because anytime that people get more tools, they also get more tools to control us.
Right.
So it's
It's kind
like
of tyrannical, really.
right. So it's like, where does this end? Like, can we really beat them with technology? Can we really beat them with just the next piece of fruit off the tree? Like, if we could just do this, or if we could just do that, or, you know, that then we're going to get freedom and progress. Or should I be a Luddite and should I go blow up all the machines and go live on my farm with who are the
I've
people
had those thoughts too.
you know? So I'm or are those both too extreme and it's somewhere in the middle? Like
Probably.
but
Yeah.
can we not have I just like it just doesn't seem like we can have nice things. It just doesn't seem like people can handle having nice things.
Yeah, no. Like at this point, me spending cash, I feel like is an act of defiance because I'm like, I'm not bringing in central bank digital currency as long as I'm walking around with cash in my pocket.
I
So
know, but I'm torn. I really only buy things I don't want the government to know I'm buying in cash. And I try to get the cash at an ATM way far away
right,
from where I'm doing the
right.
transaction. They know my secrets now.
I know, but like it's crazy that we have to even be thinking of these
I
things.
know,
Like
but the
it's
problem is that you get points for your credit card. Like, why wouldn't I want 1.5% cash back on every purchases and 3% at gas stations?
well, now that you say that, my credit card is tied to like airline miles, which I haven't flown anywhere since 2020. So I was like, I need to change that because that is dumb.
We should go somewhere. I have a bunch too.
Should go somewhere.
Yeah, so like that's my thing, or like I'm trying to buy more stuff from the farms and farmers markets. You have to be more intentional about that. And also I have an Amazon card that I get 5% back on. But I'm like I want to break that though, right? Because it's like I'm feeding the beast, whereas I'm making relationships with people like Elizabeth and like these other farmers. And really, I should just like spend a little bit more time and money to like support that ecosystem.
Right.
Because I'm paying a little bit more cash up front, but I feel like I'm getting so much more value on the back end, socially and in terms of my health.
Right. And it's a process. Right. Like we didn't get to dependence on Amazon overnight. And so it takes a while to wean off of that.
I know. I used to put in my dating profile, I was like, if you don't have Amazon Prime, this is definitely not going to work out.
That's so funny. Like, oh my gosh. It would be funny to do like a series of like how your dating profiles have changed over time.
Well, I haven't had one in like 3 years. So, but I was pretty good at figuring out the algorithm. I would say so myself. I'm going to write a book one day under a pen name.
Oh, I like it.
Who knows? The dating market could have changed though. I have to like re-download the app and like see if my stuff still works.
Yeah.
But I would imagine it does. But that is another episode for another time.
Yes, exactly.
Teaching liberty in the modern dating market. But no, I think I'm just really appreciative of having my faith and having grown up Jewish, or it could have been something else, but having grown up Jewish and having this background, and it's really important for me to give my son those same tools. Growing up, I didn't always like going to Sunday school or Hebrew school. I think I cried over and over about having to like prepare for my bat mitzvah, and like I didn't want to do it. But interesting enough, my Torah portion was from Leviticus. Which Leviticus is the chapter where God, the Jews, they just come out from Egypt. And so God is kind of giving them structures to organize their people. And I specifically had the one about the tabernacle and how Jews have like the tribe of Levi was in charge of always making sure the temple was, somebody was guarding it, somebody was there setting it up, and gave all the specifications for ensuring that the house of worship specifically to God was in order. But this is also where they talk about a lot of the kashrut laws, right? So eating kosher, about a lot of just the hand washing and the different prayers, how you're supposed to structure your day. And I think that is a very like key important part of religion is setting up these structures, because it also gave people purpose. They said, this tribe, this is your job. This tribe, this is your job. And when you have something that you're not supposed to do, that gives you purpose.
Right. Yep. And responsibility. And then like stepping into that destiny. I know that sounds like so dramatic, but truly, like when 2020 happened, like I could have gone the other way and just complied, and I would be miserable. And
right.
I was like, so no, I'm going to step into
this. What are some situations or experiences in your life that you point back to that you were going through it and it was maybe confusing or frustrating or dark time, but now you feel like, oh, this is coming into play? Or maybe just something that was fun, but you're like, I kind of wasted my time. Like I should have just moved on to the next thing.
Well, I think one thing that was like super pivotal for me is like I have PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and so which is an endocrine disrupting disease, which is mostly brought on, I think, like environmentally, toxins in our environment, things that we eat. And so I, struggled with that like for a very long time in my life. And then when it came time to have kids, just realizing like, I don't think I want to do that whole like hospital thing. And just being blessed to have like a couple of people in my life who had done it differently, who I could ask. And even with my one son, I got gestational diabetes and they wanted me to do insulin injections. And I was like researching it. I'm like, but then you're insulin dependent and there's a chance you're going to like be dependent on it afterwards. So, like, is there something else we can do? So I found a doctor who was willing to work with me on that. And, it required a lot more work on my part. But I think just from an early on stage, because I had PCOS and traditional things didn't work for me, I always had to kind of seek out other routes. And I think that has really served me well now with 2020, because I'm like, whatever the mainstream narrative has been for other teenage girls, what worked for them, like wasn't working for me. And so I've always, since that time, tried to find another way. And I think that really well prepared me for 2020, and to just say like, whatever like is being told, I'm going to do something different. And
yeah. I know. Like, I hate to have that reaction because I mean, a broken clock is even right twice a day, right? So like every once in a while, they probably are going to get something right. And you might miss it because you're like, oh,
Right. But when it comes to my health, I know my body best. And so it's not like I'm throwing out all the information, but I'm going to weigh it. And if it doesn't make sense for me, then I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like my friend said the other day, she was like, I can't believe that you never questioned the vaccines before COVID, because my son had just finished his schedule that you get, before you go to elementary school, basically.
Okay.
Before this, and I didn't really question it at all. Like, and I wasn't like an avid flu shot getter. Like I've probably gotten it before in the past, but then when I got pregnant, there was like a lot of pressure for me to get the flu shot. I was working in schools. My mom's like, oh, you should get the flu shot. The doctor's like, oh, you should get the flu shot. His father, oh, you should get the flu shot. And so it's just like, all right, like I don't want to get sick, like whatever. So I didn't really question a lot of that stuff. But now after this 2020 experience, I'm looking back and I'm like, how did I not question the experience? And I like think about my experience, like birthing my son in the hospital. Like, I don't want to have my next kid in the hospital. Like it was such a bad and traumatic experience. Like my son got injured when he was born. He had brachial plexus. Like he got, like, they made me push too early and he got all messed up. Like he was like not in a good state and they were almost gonna like give me a C-section, but thankfully I had like a really good nurse, and the nurse helped me like calm him down, did certain positions with me to like get him in place, and then they were able to come out and push. But then he got stuck, like his head came out or started to come out, but then he got stuck. And they like start to count, like when they crown, they start to count because like they need that, they start to like when they're in the birth canal, they lose oxygen, right?
Okay.
So they need to get them through there quickly and out so that then they can make sure that they're breathing. So they're like counting and it's like past 1 minute. It's like past a minute 30. It's like almost like 2 minutes. And then the woman like puts her arm all the way inside and just yanks him out. And he like comes out like purple. And I'm all messed up like on drugs. And I just remember looking down and being like, he's really black. Because his dad is black, but I was like, that's like really dark to come out. Like, don't usually babies come out lighter than that,
Did anyone say to you, no, he's purple? Like,
no, well, like I didn't really know what was going on. Like I was,
which is probably a blessing at that point.
Yeah, like I was very super out of it, and they just kind of like took him away from there. They were like, oh, we think something's like wrong with his shoulder, and then like all that pressure. But I think they just gave me like a painkiller and I just like went to sleep for the rest of the morning. And then I woke up in the afternoon and then they brought him for me to see him. But yeah, it was like he wasn't moving his right arm because it like shocked some of the nerves right here in his shoulder. So we got like physical therapy for his first year. And I think he's made like a full recovery, I believe. Like he's very athletic and
it seems fine.
Yeah, so I'm very
Person.
grateful for that. But just like looking back and seeing how I was treated, I was like, no, I'm good. I don't know. The next one, I definitely not doing that way. If
Right.
God should bless me with another one, of course, you know.
He might.
Yeah. So I would, but something else I look back on that I do feel like prepared me for this 2020 is like I've just always been a pretty like defiant person. Like I've gotten in trouble a lot. Like I almost got kicked out of high school. I got kicked out of college. I so I feel like just like being used to kind of like being in trouble, being on the hot seat and like figuring out how I'm gonna when it came to like having a different opinion on COVID, I've always had a different opinion. I've always been different. If you're going to be friends with me, you know that I'm going to say some wild stuff, you know, like, so I feel like that set me up pretty well
Love
for
it.
2020. And then the other thing, which we've talked about before, was the beautiful faces thing, you know. I started doing
Okay.
social media in 2019. I had always been like a pretty avid YouTube watcher, not always, but over the 5 years before that, you know, college into grad school, I just watched a lot of YouTube, and I knew like they always had their little intros. So I just like came up with my little intro. Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces.
Yeah.
To be silly, and it was like catchy, and it's amazing how it's literal now. You know?
It's like a segue into
Yeah,
a
sort of like
challenge.
post church, sort of like your post church thing. Like
Yeah.
I knew how like I've always thought faces were really important. I've always been a big smiler. Like I smile a lot. People always say that. I'm one of those people that tells people to smile. Like, you know, those people like, oh, I hate when people don't tell me to smile. Like, no, shut up and smile. Like um, but the different little markers along the way that all come together to make you
Yeah.
feel like you're in your purpose, your passion, you know, you're using your skills. That's God. Like
Yeah.
that's God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, but we're coming up on, you know, 42 minutes. So is there anything you'd like to say to wrap this up to the people, to encourage them to have faith, to maintain faith, to come back to their faith?
I would say to just whatever your gifting is, like figure out how God's calling you to use it. And that's going to be different for every single person. And I think that just like my hand has a different use than my foot, like we don't want everybody to just be a hand, right? Like I think that's like the beautiful thing about being a human is that we all have different skills and abilities. And God can call us differently. Like it drives me crazy when I don't know, churches try to make you feel like you have to do things a certain way because I don't think that that's true. Like, and we're all even on our own relationship with God. Like, we're in, like, what might be where he's calling me is not where he's calling somebody else, or somebody else is further along in their faith journey on forgiveness than I am on mine. And like, that is okay. Like, before I used to think, not before 2020, probably like before I had kids, I think, because once you have kids, you start like realizing there's a lot of nuance to things. But I thought that the world was much more black and white than it is. And you just realize, like, no, it's all a journey, and God is with us in this journey the whole time. And he'll bring us from A to B to C, and we just have to go along for the ride. So I just say, figure out where you are in your journey and keep riding, keep pedaling.
Right. Yeah. And then those moments of struggle when you can't see the light, when you feel like your faith is, you know, I just keep with those practices. And also I feel like in those times, those are the most important times to just kind of like let those stressors go, like hand them over to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So that's something
absolutely.
that I do is I'm just like, all right, God, this is where we are. I got a bunch of stuff I need to do. I don't think I'm gonna be able to do it all. I'm not gonna
Right.
stress. I'm not gonna freak out about it. I'm gonna do what you allow me to do. And
Absolutely.
you know, it is what it is.
He got
So
me this far. He'll keep me going the rest of the way. That's kind of how I look at it.
exactly. So if you want more of these types of conversations, Rachel and I actually do them on Sundays at around 10 a.m. over on Instagram. So you can
Yeah.
follow both of us on Instagram. Links are down in the description. I'm at Teaching Liberty. Rachel's at Langan Rachel. And if you ever want to join us for a conversation, we are always into having people with diverse opinions, perspectives, and approaches to faith and religion. So definitely let us know. Also, make sure you're subscribed to this YouTube channel here. We're trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers. And if you really want to support what I got going on here, head over to teachingliberty.org/community and join the community. Like Rachel, she's like my number one supporter over here. Oh, wait, I'm pointing the wrong way. It's this way. My number one supporter over here. Again, teachingliberty.org/community. And most importantly, don't forget, I love your beautiful face.
All right.